iCommunity shines a light on the wide array of community news, arts and culture, and prolific charity efforts within the Asian diaspora networks. It's where the global Indian impact on the ground is celebrated. Log on at iglobalnews.com. Hello, and a very warm welcome to today's session of the Living Bridge Conversations, the live series brought to you by iGlobal, your multimedia hub for and about global Indians. Now, we've got somebody very special with us today because he's done a few podcasts with us before right here on iGlobal as well. And I'm really happy that he's with us today. And we've got a very pertinent and very important subject to discuss today, which you're going to get very excited about, I'm sure, and certainly learn a lot from the gentleman I'm going to be talking to in just a second. And if you have just joined us, my name's Tony Patty, your host for today, and I'm joined by the wonderful Shaileen Shah. And Shaileen Shah is a happiness coach and the founder of Happy Life Habits. Shaileen, a very warm welcome to you. It's lovely to see you again.
No, thank you. And I'm really pleased to be here and able to share. And thank you, iGlobal and team, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed. So happiness coach Shaileen Shah is the founder of Happy Life Habits, which aims to positively impact happiness and well-being levels by creatively and uniquely combining personal development with the science of happiness and spirituality. And a quick word for you, our viewers and listeners, this show is yours too. So do drop us your comments and questions, and we'll be more than happy to pick those up as we go along through the show. And we'd be really, really happy to hear from you. So, Shaileen, once again, a warm welcome to you. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking about grief, and we're going to be talking about happiness and the combination of the two, and how we can overcome grief and also bring happiness into our lives as well. First thing I'm going to throw right at you, because I'm just so tempted to do this, and you know how naughty I am, Shaileen. Make me happy.
Okay, so Tony, what's one good thing that's happened to you this week?
Yes, one good thing. Probably, I think the breakfast I had this morning.
Fantastic.
It was the highlight of the week so far, and we're only just like the second day of the week.
Indeed, yes. So sometimes it's just asking ourselves the question of one good thing that's happened, what are we grateful for, or what are we looking forward to, and those can help us be happier.
So we look at happy life habits, and we look at the processes which you've just gone into briefly about bringing that happiness into one's mind, brain, soul, and our well-being as well. What we'd like to know is to find out a little bit more about the motivation behind setting this up. You asked me what made me happy this week so far. Well, I said my breakfast this morning because I haven't eaten very well yesterday, and I made up for it this morning by a scrumptious breakfast. So that was an interesting one. So you got me going on that one, Shaileen.
Yeah. No. So the motivation was that a number of years ago, I suffered from work-related stress, and the things which helped me cope with that work-related stress were drawing upon learning and practices from personal development, the science of happiness, and spirituality. And those helped me get back on track and to deal with these things. And those are also the three areas which I enjoy learning about. And so as I learned more, I understood that we can train ourselves to be happy. We can build habits, and we can rewire our hearts and souls to be happier. So that's the motivation. And so as I learn and experience and practice these things, I like to share these things and help serve others too.
Now, whilst you're doing this thing, and you mentioned various situations you went through in life, and clearly some of those were no fault of your own. And often we find ourselves in situations and dilemmas whereby we have no control over. They can either bring grief or happiness into our lives, the very subjects we're discussing today together. And so when we go through these processes, dealing with those processes, they could stay with us for a very long time in our lives, can't they?
No, they can do. And in particular with grief or trauma or any of these kind of things, they can be a long time. And I guess keeping it pertinent on grief, everyone's grief journey can be different. Some
Yeah.
people could cope with grief and grow from it within a few weeks, a few months, and others could be years, many years. And this is one of the key messages from today's session, that everyone's grief journey is unique, and for us not to compare ourselves with other people's journey who may have felt, who we felt may have healed earlier.
Yeah. So as we talk about grief, what I'd like to ask you, Shaileen, is that it's a difficult subject. And we've all sadly been grappling with grief in many different ways, particularly over the last few months since the pandemic hit us. And I'm talking about COVID. So grief is a huge subject in people's lives, not just by the pandemic, but various other situations that people face in their lives. What happens in the brain when we grieve? And tell us about the different stages and the feelings that we go through. Explain those for us, if you would, please, Shaileen.
Sure, I'll do that. And I'll also just explain what grief is. So as you quite rightly said, grief is not just related to the loss of a person. It could be loss of a business. It could be loss of a job, loss of a possession, a relationship. So when we feel that sense of loss is when we, grief can occur. But in relation to grief, in relation to a death or a loss of a person, what grief is it's an unwanted change.
Right.
So it's a change, and it's a change we didn't want, and that's what causes grief to occur. In terms of this session, we've called it positive grief, and the reason I've called it positive grief is often we see grief as a negative emotion because we see sadness and we see depression and anger and all of these kind of senses and feelings. But the reason we feel that grief is because of love. So grief is an expression of love, and that's quite a different thing to get your head around. And a couple of things that people have shared about grief is the substitute of grief is the substitute for that person's presence on earth. So that person is no longer on earth. So that's why you have grief, because of that love. Grief is where love has nowhere to go, is another one, which I think is very powerful. And grief is, in my opinion, not a negative emotion. It's a positive emotion because it's an expression of love. We have grief because we have love, because we have that sense of connection with the person who's passed away. So that's what grief is about. Yeah. And when we experience grief and this unwanted change, what happens is the brain goes through various changes. So we've got the thinking part of the brain, we've got the feeling part of the brain. Right. Both of these become underactive due to this shock and due to this trauma. So our thinking becomes less, our feeling becomes less. The part of the brain which is one of the older regions of the brain goes into survival mode. It's there to protect us and go into survival mode. So that's coming into play. And that's also causing us to have fight, flight, or fear response, which causes stress and causes the stress hormones to come in. And so
it's a sense of losing, really. It's a sense of missing out. And it's a sense of, hang on, I had this and now I've lost it. What am I going to do with myself?
It's that sense of loss and sense of confusion of, suddenly it not being there. And the brain, trying to protect us, hence reducing our thinking and feeling capacities. And in doing so, that's why we sometimes, not sometimes, that's why we feel confusion and we feel different mood swings, because all of these things are occurring. And also, the part of the brain which controls our fear and our sleep becomes overactive. So there's that sense of fear of the future. What shall I do? What will happen? And then our sleep function goes out of whack as well. So either we're sleeping too much or we're not sleeping enough. And so all of those things have that impact, which causes a disruption to what we're used to, and hence all of these different feelings.
Yeah. And they are difficult to deal with, even at the best of times, as you quite rightly say. We are talking with Shaileen Shah, who is a life coach, happiness coach, and we're talking about grief and happiness today and the cause and effects of both. Shaileen, I would say, though, to you that the most important part of healing and the grieving part is to acknowledge that you are actually grieving, right? So taking two things that help with most with grief are time and support, I would have thought. And those things come to my mind whilst I talk with you today. Of course, you can't force yourself to feel better. And I would have thought that it's important that you grieve for your loved ones and allow yourself to feel the way that you do. Give us your thoughts around that, if you would, please.
No, absolutely. Fully agree with that. So one is, as you said, awareness.
Yeah.
Two is time. And third is support. And with that, what I hadn't shared in the previous one were the stages of grief. So,
Right.
there's the different stages that people can go through. There's denial, there's anger, there's bargaining, depression. And these are the stages which have been defined by a psychologist called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And there's acceptance, and then there's meaning. And that those first four, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, that's when the left and the right side of the brain, the thinking, the feeling, are separated. But as we come to integrate those, that's when we get the sense of acceptance and meaning. And that is through awareness of what's going on with us or going on with someone else, providing that support, as well as the nature of time. And as we said, for some, it might come quicker, and for others, it might take longer.
In your capacity as a happiness coach, Shaileen, could you tell us about, or even give us examples, if you would, to tackle and grow around grief? Because we understand, we've spoken about grief and we've understood the characteristics around that. But can a person grieve, for example, loss of a loved one, or whatever reasons that you gave us earlier, the loss of a house, the loss of something material, divorce, relationships, everything that which cause grief in itself? It'd be nice to learn from you today about ways in which we can tackle and grow from that grief.
Absolutely. So the first most important thing I'd like to say is not to deny the grief. It's part of our natural process when something like this occurs. So it's to acknowledge it, to embrace it, to live through it. And so that's important. So that awareness of that this is happening, and to work through it. The word I would say is more along the lines of grow around the grief, but not to tackle it. So grief is going to exist. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it's there for the rest of your life. And an image that I've shared and come across, which helps look at that, is when we look at grief, if you think of it as like a small ball, what we often think is over passage of time, that ball becoming smaller, our grief becoming smaller. And it's, it shows a jar and it shows a ball in there, like a ping pong ball. And we think it'll get smaller and smaller, like a small marble. But no, that's not what occurs. What happens is the ball stays the same. So our grief is the same. Right. What we do is we grow around it, and our jar becomes bigger and bigger. And the way we do this is, quite rightly, as we said, talking with people, expressing our feelings, writing things down, getting it out of our head, expression, crying, asking for support, creating boundaries and space as and when we need, keeping routines as best we can, because those routines will help do that integration again, to adapt to the change that's occurred. And also, as we work through these, to make sure we look after our self-care. So eating, sleeping, and drinking sensibly, because those can go out of whack, and those are important to help us with that integration. Meditation, going for walks, practice of gratitude, journaling, spending time in nature, all of these and reflection can help us grow around that grief. So it's being aware of these things.
Yeah. Very well said. So I'm going to throw something at you right now, and give me your answers on this if you would. And because you are a lifestyle coach and a happiness coach, you would understand this only too well. And therefore, I'm now going to throw something at you quite deliberately. And these are myths based around grief. And myth number one I'm going to give you is the pain will go away faster if you just try and ignore it. Okay. Myth number 2, it's important to be strong in the face of loss. Of course, you and I know that's easier said than done. I'm going to prompt you for your thoughts on that in a moment. And myth number 3 I have for you, Shaileen, is if you don't cry, it means you aren't sorry about the loss. Okay. And I've got a couple more for you. Grieving should last about a year. All right. Because we're told so. And the final one I've got for you, here you go. Moving on with your life means forgetting about your loss. We hear this only too often from people who want to ill-advise us when it comes to grief and try and bring about that happiness that we so yearn for in our lives. Given these myths that I've just thrown at you now and thrown you literally into the deep end with these, what are your thoughts on these?
Okay, so let's work through them one at a time. What was the first myth?
First one was the pain will go away faster if you just ignore it.
Yeah. So if we look at any kind of pain we have, whether it's a bee sting or we've grazed our knee or any other kind of pain, is it going to go away if we ignore it?
No, it takes time to heal, right?
Exactly. And that's the key word, heal. So it takes time to heal. And we can do things to help that healing process become quicker. So, disinfectant, to clearing the wound, so forth. So ignoring the pain, it just means the pain is going to be still there, suppressed, and it'll come up at various times, however it may, and express itself. What happens is that over time, we don't, and as I shared, the grief doesn't become less. We've grown around it. So we're not forgetting the grief. Yeah. We've just learned to live with the grief and move forward. So
number two was it's important to be strong in the face of loss. Feeling sad, frightened, or lonely is a normal reaction to loss, of course.
Yep. You don't have to feel strong. You feel what you feel and you express what you feel. And we will feel a whole bunch of things. Some people will have a mindset and approach of being strong. Others will have a mindset and approach of feeling sad and wanting to cry. And you'll go through all of those different stages we spoke about and all of those emotions. And the thing is, whatever comes up, be aware of it, embrace it, acknowledge it, and then also use some of the things that you've learned about to help move into a different energy and a different feeling.
Now you mentioned the word cry, and my third one, which I was throwing at you, was this: if you don't cry, it means you aren't sorry about the loss. Crying is a normal response to sadness, surely.
Yeah, and I'll share a personal story. So it's almost 12 days away now since it will be the first anniversary of my father's death, and on the a couple of days after he passed away, I had got ready to let my emotions, come through and cry, and had got into a quiet space and was just going to, let the emotions come up and cry. And just as I was about to do that, a friend messaged me on WhatsApp and just asked, how are you? You okay? And I said, yeah, I'm kind of okay. And we had a video call, and that emotion of wanting to cry then got parked. I got taken to a different energy level, had a sense of connection and a really great conversation with the friend. I didn't feel the need to cry at that point. And you can cry internally and you can cry externally. You don't have to have tears to feel the sadness or the loss or the remorse. And some people will cry publicly and wail publicly, and some of it's useful for them to express and get that out, and some of it's unfortunately also for show in that way. But you can cry internally and reflect internally, and that's all okay.
That's incredible. There's lots to take away from that. Here's one for you: grieving should last about a year. Is there a specific time frame for grieving?
No. And as I shared earlier, everyone's grief journey is different. It reminds me of a different kind of a related question. What's the worst grief? Is it the loss of a young kid who's lost his parents? Is it the loss of a newly married couple who's lost a spouse, or is it loss of elderly parents who've lost a middle-aged child? Which is the worst grief? You can't compare.
No.
Each grief is worse in its own right. It's different in its own right. The worst grief is your grief. So you can't compare grief, you can't judge, and everyone's grief journey is going to be different. Everyone is going to be coming in at a different stage in that grief journey with regards to the support they have, the mindset they have, the things they can lean on, and also what they pull in to help them with that journey. And whether you take weeks, months, or years, it's absolutely fine. And don't be comparing with anyone else. Just be doing the things which support you to help cope each day, and to remember that you're growing, and that over time, the grief doesn't become less, but you become bigger and you grow around that grief.
Thank you for sharing that with us. We are talking with Shaileen Shah, lifestyle coach and happiness coach today. And so far, we've learned about acknowledging our pain. We've learned about accepting grief, which can trigger many different unexpected emotions. We've spoken about that. We've also understood that grieving processes will be unique to you as a person. And we've also found out that we can also seek out face-to-face support from people who care about you. And Shaileen gave us a great example of that just a few moments ago. And another great thing that Shaileen shared with us today was supporting yourself emotionally by taking care of yourself physically as well, taking in the nature, a walk in the park, and recognizing the difference between grief and depression is perhaps something we ought to be looking at as well. Tell you what, though, we're going to continue talking with Shaileen in just a few moments. And we thank you for joining us right here on iGlobal. If you have just joined us, we're talking with Shaileen Shah, happiness and lifestyle coach, right here on our Living Bridge Conversations. We'll be back after this break.
iGlobal Radio is the brand new hub of podcasts for and about global Indians. News, views, interviews, wellness, money matters, and much, much more. Tune in to iGlobal Radio at iglobalnews.com.
Now, as we continue to talk about grief, we're also going to be talking about happiness as well. And Shaileen Shah joins us today on this very special program. So a little bit about these Living Bridge Conversations, first of all, very briefly. These have been curated by iGlobal to bring you many such discussions and deliberations. And they will include, I promise you this, many spiritual discourses, musical journeys, heartwarming anecdotes, energetic fitness routines, festive fashion foodie recipes, and much, much more. And we're very happy and proud to share those with you right here with our Living Bridge Conversations. So do stay tuned to the at the iGlobal social media channels for updates on our regular streams with an array of guests that embody the British Indian diaspora living bridge. And of course, you, our viewers and listeners, are at the heart of these conversations. So do join in with your questions in the comments box as well, and we'll pick those up as we go along. So we thank you for joining us. Shaileen, back with you again. Thanks for bearing with us. Now, as we continue to talk about grief and the great things that you've shared with us so far, on the subject of grief, let's move to gratitude. How does that fit into coping with grief?
Yeah, so for me, gratitude's been essential for dealing with many things in life. And as we, had shared before, when we experience grief, our thinking and our feeling brains have kind of become underactive and separated.
Mm.
When we practice gratitude, what we're doing is we're invoking the thinking, because we're thinking about what we're grateful for, and we're invoking our feeling because we're feeling those feelings, and we're helping to reintegrate both the left and the right, the thinking and the feeling together again. So those different stages we talked about, we come closer to the acceptance and the meaning stages. So gratitude plays an essential role for me in a grief journey. I'm just going to share something very quickly, which I had shared in relation to Thanksgiving, which was just this weekend gone.
That's right, yeah.
And it's counting our blessings and giving thanks. And what I shared on that was that what I love about gratitude and positive emotions is that it's a habit of the heart. And I feel good. I am more productive, and I can't be sad or depressed or angry when I'm feeling gratitude or a positive emotion. And it's helped me to deal with stress, grief, mental health, relationships, and respond to challenges and say yes to opportunities. The beauty of gratitude that it amplifies the good that's already that we have. So, and it helps rescue us from a negative, from negativity or struggles to foster connection.
Yeah.
It heals, it gives hope, it helps us focus on not being deflated, and just generally helps our whole well-being. So when we are in grief, we're often, thinking of our loss. But if we switch the focus and say, what did we have? What am I grateful for that I had with this connection, with this person, or with this situation, or with this opportunity? What did we have? What did I learn? What, how, the times we had, and focus on those memories of their character, the positive traits they had. Yeah. That's one thing that, I recommend people to do to help with that integration. And also, thinking of your fondest memories. So that's all related to counting the blessings and being grateful for what we have.
You see, the thing is, Shaileen, it's not easy to understand how gratitude can actually help you in your grief process, looking through the lens of pain. And it will not allow for the feeling of the understanding of gratitude. And also, it's extremely difficult to see possibilities in the early learning period of gratitude when you're dealing with grief. So I put it to you that gratitude to me is the quality or feeling of being grateful or thankful, and even perhaps, even if you like, appreciative of benefits received. Going back to what you've just said, looking back at some fond memories that you might have in the back of your mind.
Yeah. So what is the question?
The question was about gratitude in grief and the quality of feeling or the grateful or thankful from what you've actually already received in your life. How does one go about comprehending that and bring that into the forefront and moving ourselves forward with it?
Understood. Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that gratitude has the power to do when we practice it and we feel it is it releases happy chemicals into our brain, which can help us feel better. It activates the learning center in the brain. So remember, we've already said that some of the parts of the brain have become underactive, but if we're able to activate the learning centers in the brain, we can become resourceful and we can become solution focused instead of problem focused. Okay. And instead of being caught up in, why is this happening to me? We can say, okay, what can I learn from this? What's the meaning of this? How can I move forward?
I'm moving forward with processes that I've got on in lives. There's a very interesting point to take, and I'm sure we could perhaps even have a completely separate program on that and talk about till the day's end on that. But with today's discussion, is positive grief and gratitude the same things? And do they go hand in hand? Because to a certain degree, I know we've already answered this, we've already covered this, but perhaps we need to delve into this into greater depth and look at positiveness, grief, and gratitude all combined into one. Because what we're talking about here is creating a balance, an equilibrium in our minds, in our hearts, and our souls, aren't we?
Yes, no, very much so. So positive grief and gratitude aren't the same thing. So positive grief is, as we said, unwanted change that's occurred. And positive grief is that recognition that grief is there because of love. And instead of constantly being in the sadness and the depression, we do, acknowledge it, we do embrace it, we do feel those things, but we also then choose to put into play some of the things which can help us feel more positive and happier and help us heal. So that's
I'm getting that. Yes, I get the gist of what you're saying. What about finally then, if you would, Shaileen, share some of your wisdom with us and your experience, and perhaps some happiness mantras that you can share with our viewers and listeners today, and we can learn something from you as we continue to deal with the uncertainties or not only of the pandemic, but also the stresses of daily life and grief that we go through, small or large.
Sure, perfect. So one is, now hopefully this message has come through. Happiness is a choice, and I can choose to be happy. And in choosing to be happy, I can train myself to be happier by doing various things.
Yeah.
The other one is that we all often have heard, this too shall pass. So
Yeah.
recognizing that, things are temporary. You mentioned about control earlier, and it's also being aware of the things we can control and the things we can't, and put our energies into the things that we can control. It's also the Gandhi quote that I've sometimes shared, which says, happiness is when what we think, what we say, and what we do are in harmony. So there's alignment and congruence in our thinking, in our speech, and in our saying. And again, it comes back to that idea of integration as well.
Yeah.
And the final, mantra is, I think we the fans of Amir Khan from Three Idiots. Put your hand on your heart and say, all is well.
All is well.
Be reminded of that.
Absolutely.
All is well.
Absolutely, yes. And I think it's on a more serious note, actually, Shaileen, it's probably fair to say that if anybody is going through extreme grief, there are experts such as yourself, but there's also medical help and advice available from many different forms. And if anybody should be suffering from stress and grief, then please get some advice and get it seen to and see an expert. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I'm not an expert on grief. I'm an expert on my grief and the experience I've had over the last few years. So that's what I'm sharing. But there are many good resources available. St. Luke's Hospice have got grief kind cards that you can use now, which they've launched to help connect with people. And instead of sympathy cards, you're giving empathy cards. So Cruise is another charity which helps, and it's got lots of information. And on the Happy Life Habits website, there's a positive grief page where there's various videos based on the talks I've done, but also other resources and articles which can help people, whether it's grief of a parent, grief of a child or a spouse, and podcasts and things that I've come across. And this recording will go up on there as well once it's available.
Fantastic. We're talking with Shaileen Shah, and we're talking about happiness and grief and how to cope with grief here today as we come towards the end of the show today. We're back after this.
iEntertainment is brought to you by iGlobal for all the latest film and series reviews, starry interviews and cinema listings covering Bollywood and beyond to reflect a truly pan-Indian entertainment spectrum. Check out the latest at iGlobalnews.com.
So do you ever get the feeling that you haven't spoken enough about a subject and you want to continue talking about it, as I want to with Shaileen today, but sadly we've run out of time. Shaileen, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us today. And I mean what I say. I wish I could talk with you for a lot longer on this, but no doubt we'll be able to do a lot of podcasts together on these very subjects in the coming future. Compliments of iGlobal news.com. So thank you so much for joining us today, Shaileen, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thank you. And thank you, Tony. And thank you to the team for facilitating this. Really appreciate the opportunity for able to share on this important subject.
Thank you so much. So that's the end of today's show. Remember, you can also play back any of the past sessions under the video section of iGlobalnews.com. or on our Facebook and YouTube channels as well. So check those out, won't you? And for more Living Bridge conversation, stay tuned at iGlobalnews.com. And meanwhile, do keep your feedback, comments, and questions coming in, and also your entries for the iGlobal Diwali photography and essay competition. And send those to this address, which is info@iGlobalnews.com. Once again, that's info@iGlobalnews.com. And the deadline for the competition is here, so make sure you get your emails in very, very soon and be a winner with us right here on iGlobalnews.com. And so until next time, from me, Tony Patty, a huge thank you to you. Thank you for listening and watching, and once again to our very special guest, Shaileen Shah, today. We thank you for joining us here today. From me, And from Shaileen, bye-bye for now.